Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our legal show. Today, I have a very special guest. This guest, I've been working with him for the last 8 years. One of the attorneys that I admire, and I think. Let me tell you a story. About 8 years ago, there was a Chinese business owner who operated a buffet restaurant out in the city of Redland. And one morning, he was driving his staff on the way to work. All of a sudden, a pickup truck come from the other opposite direction, struck our van, and our client, the car flipped, and then instantly killing the driver, injuring 6 passengers inside the car. We get on the case because many of friends we helped before, they came to us for help. We're doing the damage control. We help them to plan the funeral, get the body, and also set them up for doctor's treatment. So we filed a lawsuit against the other truck driver. The truck driver only have 100,000 policy limit insurance, doesn't have any property. And so we're stuck with a serious injury with no insurance from other side. So our guys basically is out of luck. But luckily, I get to know this lawyer by the name of Mike Older. A lot of attorney friends said, you should try Mr. Older, see maybe he could revise the case. So we approach him. Yes, it's very hard to get a hold of him because he's a big shot. When we talk about personal injury, the insurance industry, basically, the phrase of this guy by the name of Mike Older. So luckily, we'll get his attention. He get on the case. He worked with us, and he said, and he did a thorough analysis of the case, and said, you know what? There's some road defect. The city failed to do their job to maintain the safety of the road. So we team up together. We file a lawsuit against the city for failure to maintain the road. 6 months into the case, our client was out of luck. Finally, the insurance come back. Okay, all right, well, let's talk. 6 months, another 6 months goes by after the lawsuit deposition and all that. We're getting ready to go to trial. Before we go to trial, the insurance finally saying that, okay, Mr. Older, let's settle the case. The case come from $100,000 value case. Finally, we settle it for $11 million. Our client, the family, was compensated. So, from $100,000 case to $11 million case, that was the highlight of my career. That's the reason I was so fortunate to get to know the top personal injury litigator in California, throughout the country. Mr. Older get a big name, and so let's welcome Mr. Mike Older to our show. Mike?
Daniel, so nice. Thank you. That was a very memorable case. And
yes.
Throughout it, you were so amazing with the clients, with the communication. We really worked very well together, and what a blessing to be able to help that family.
Yes. Well, I remember the film, Casablanca. The end of the film is that, I think that's the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
I agree.
I think
we've done quite a few things together.
Yes, and after that, we're very fortunate to have a chance to work hand in hand with Mike's team. I mean, that's something that we're fortunate. That's the reason when we're trying to work on a case, we talk about a lot of times Mike would talk about helping the client first. I mean, all this case, sometimes we found out that eventually we try our best, but we could not get anywhere because the other party doesn't have insurance, and we could not find anybody who's responsible for it. But at the same time, Mike's team and our team all understand that, we try our best and, we help our client. I mean, so that's the reason, I'm so fortunate because Mike is also the former president of Consumer Attorney of Los Angeles. The consumer attorney, I think, maybe Mike, you could share some light about why you do, personal injury and why you get into this area of the practice.
Sure, and the organization, the Consumer Attorneys Association of Los Angeles, is by far the largest plaintiffs lawyer organization, certainly local organization in the country by a large factor.
Yes.
Based in large part on educating lawyers to better serve their clients. And I got involved, 25 years ago, ultimately became president of that organization, all with an eye of how can what you and I are doing for clients, how can we do it better and help clients even more? And over the years, I've been exposed to other lawyers who I've learned from as well, and it all comes together, and you and I work together on a case, and that combined knowledge pays off sometimes,
Yeah.
And,
you were nominated 3 times at the Trial Lawyer of California, which is very prestigious award. And actually, you get awarded many times. And starting from 2004, you have been named as, the Attorney of the Year, Super Attorney, all these years, for the last 30 years. How do you make the insurance so scared? I mean, when I trying to talk to insurance, they just say, okay, all right, they trying to probably, push me around. But when we hire the big gun, having Mike out on our side, the insurance listen, and they're afraid to go to trial. And what's the secret here?
Well, I'm probably like a lot of people that are watching, listening. When I was young, I learned from people who were smart and good in their craft, and I watched and learned and did everything that I could. And then, I started from the bottom. I had one case, and but I had a desire to learn and to help people, and so I dove in with everything I had and started trying cases.
Mm-hmm.
You learn. And that was now almost 30 years ago.
Yes.
And you get better at it, and then you learn, and then you get better at it, and you develop a reputation by taking cases like the one you talked about, where there doesn't appear to be a way of collecting money, and then you collect $11 million because of my track record. They see that I can win that case in the future, and then that's why they want to settle the case. And now I'm, 100 plus trials in, and I've kind of seen it all. And the question of whether we together will go to trial is never an issue. Of course, they know we will, and that's why they get scared, because a jury of 12 good people can see the truth many times. And a lot of times companies don't want the truth to be exposed, so they settle the case.
Mm. Well, I think besides the money award, I think what you were able to do is make an impact on policy. I think the city of Redland realized that they make a big mistake, not only compensating our client, but also improve the road condition.
Absolutely. And they fixed the problem that we showed that they had, and so that accident won't happen again that way, because what we did was we forced them to fix the road, and what a wonderful benefit.
I remember, for the 30 years, the people calculated some of the cases, high-profile cases you had win, I think add up to more than a billion compensation for the victims of the injury accidents. When you're thinking about, besides the money part, that what do you think that you enjoy your work?
Yeah, it's actually now it's about $1.5 billion. And
wow.
But that's one client at a time. That's one group at a time, and that's helping thousands of people. And but that number means something to the other side, and they pay attention. When we are involved, pay attention.
Yes. Now, Mike, one of the things, let's talk about some of the damage. I know that, people talking about, a lot of people saying, well, what kind of, from an accident, personal injury cases, what kind of damage can I collect? What kind of money? I mean, what's the legal theory behind that? Can you probably elaborate a little bit more on that part? Normally in the personal injury matter, what kind of damage compensation the victim or the family is entitled to?
Sure. There's two main types of damages. The first part is things that cost money, your medical bills and the income that you would lose. They're economic damages that we use economists and accountants to calculate how much money have you lost, and if you can't work in the future, how much money will you lose in the future? How much of your medical bills have been in the past, and we use experts and doctors to say what are your medical bills going to be in the future. That's the first type of damage, and it's calculated to $1.
Okay.
Other type of damage is what we call pain and suffering, money for the loss of enjoyment of life, for the loss of love, for companionship, to compensate for being in pain, for anxiety and being upset about what's happened to your life. If it's a wrongful death case, the loss of a loved one. Mm-hmm. Those are called the non-economic damages. So you have the lost wages and medical bills as one part, and then the pain, suffering, loss of enjoyment as the other part.
Some personal injury lawyer would be saying, well, if medical bill is $1,000, you time 2 or 3 times, and that's a pain and suffering. But from the cases we work on together, I think pain and suffering sometimes it's more than 10 times or 15 times. How do you maximize the pain and suffering? What kind of things that a plaintiff can do to increase the compensation for pain and suffering?
A lot of that is finding a lawyer that will actually work on your case, not that you see on a billboard and they just. It's very easy to settle a case if your bills are $1,000 to settle it for $1,000 plus a couple $1,000 and it's easy, and so a lot of lawyers don't ever want to do that work that it takes to make that case worth what it really should be worth. And what we do is we talk and we meet, we go to the home if we can, we get photographs, videos that show the life of our client and how it's been affected. And then we don't accept the lowball offer and stick to our guns. And they know that we're not going to fold. And they then have the evidence they need about the family, about the plaintiff, to put more money and settle the case for more money. But it takes a little longer, and it takes a lot more work for the lawyer that a lot of lawyers are not willing to do, which is one of the things that attracted me to you in your office is you are most concerned about your clients. Above you, above the lawyers, you're about your clients. And that is exactly what I feel is the right thing to do.
Now, does the pain and suffering also concerning, does it deal with the culture differences? Like in America, American culture is that you're 18 and then you're no longer, the parents, they don't care about the kids anymore. But in the Chinese culture, when is the only child of the family, you have an obligation to care for the senior parents, because that's the support. As a matter of fact, in China, there's a law that, if you're adult, you're obligated legally, financially to care for your parents. Yes. So especially under the one-child policy that, only family is that, only one daughter and the son, if one pass away and the family, the seniors, the one who suffer a lot.
Exactly.
Now, how do you feel? I mean, can that kind of culture differences would be integrated in the American system? Can we convince the insurance that, you know, this is serious, you know, because you have this, you know, someone who died who could have providing support for the senior citizens?
Yeah, and that requires an understanding of the cultural differences. Obviously, I'm not Chinese, but when we work together, you
Yes.
and I work together to understand the cultural significance, and so that we can present that. And it's interesting, I had a trial I did
Yes.
where a Chinese woman, a young woman, had an amputation, and a lot of the evidence that her leg was cut off, and a lot of the evidence that we put on that resulted in a almost $9 million verdict was the cultural significance to her family of the loss of her leg, which is different than what might be here in, you know, the United States. And
Yeah.
sorry, I just toggle through my Zoom. So that cultural difference, which at first you may say was hard to understand, when the jury understood the significance, they actually felt more empathy for the plaintiff and awarded more money, because it was culturally much more significant maybe than in a different culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that you know, that remind me about, you know, 3 years ago we have a water heater broke case. Might remember a senior citizen in a Hamburg living in an apartment, and the water heater had some problem. Called the manager. The manager didn't respond, and later on, you know, the water heater exploded, and then you know, the 70 years old a woman from Hong Kong, you know, have 3 kids, you know, who was devastating by the injury of the mom because they were so close to her.
Yeah.
And I think in that case, you know, we are presenting a very, very good, compelling damage evidence to show that, you know, they're very close to each other. And I think Mike was able to convince the insurance to tender their policy. They made, I think, $1 million from the, you know, the water heater, and then $5 million from the apartment insurance carrier. And those kind of things, I think, Mike, you know, I that's the reason I was so, a lot of my high award come from your wisdoms. You know, I think, you know, teamwork is very important. One of the things we talk about the teamwork is the culture. And I think one of the things you could probably elaborate a little bit on the comparative fault. I think of some of the things that in the insurance saying that you had some problem, you know, you were at fault. I mean, I think you were in the pioneer in protecting the consumer's right. You advocacy for a lot of legislature to make sure, even though a consumer might be at fault, but they still need to be compensated on that part. Maybe you could, you know, on the liability part, probably explain to our viewer what is a comparative fault in California.
And so in other states, if you are injured and you are at fault to a certain degree, you can't recover any money. But California is not like that. In California, we have a system that if you're injured and it's determined that you are 20% at fault and the defendant is 80% at fault, then the defendant pays 80%, and you basically don't get the 20% that was your own fault. So there's many situations, if you slip and fall, a jury may determine that, you know, maybe you should have watched closer and you're 10% at fault. But that doesn't mean you don't have a claim. It just means it's a little less valuable because you also participated in the action to injure you. If you're not a plaintiff and it's someone else's fault, if you have a lot of medical bills, California is very advantageous because any defendant found at fault, even 1%, has to pay the plaintiff's entire medical bills and lost income. And so we've been very successful in some cases where a very seriously injured person who has a lot of medical bills in the future and lost income, if we can show 1% at fault on another defendant, that defendant will pay the entire income loss, the entire medical bill loss. And it's a very powerful thing to get compensation for our clients.
So in that sense, even though maybe our client might be at fault, like suppose that he might be speeding or maybe should not cut in front of the big truck, but if the truck driver behind him was not able to stop in time, maybe they still with some 40% responsible for the accident.
Right. Very, very examples. You may be speeding and you're in an accident, but that doesn't mean that you can't recover. It just means that maybe you're a little bit responsible, but the defendant who caused the accident is mostly responsible. A lot of times, if you weren't wearing a seatbelt, it doesn't mean you don't recover. It just means that they will reduce the amount of the recovery by some percentage because you should have been wearing your seatbelt. It doesn't mean you can't recover. It just means you recover a little less. And what a lawyer's job is to argue that, for example, wearing a seatbelt would not have made a difference. And so you don't reduce the plaintiff's verdict because, yes, they should have been wearing a seatbelt, but they would have gotten injured whether they were wearing a seatbelt or not. And so therefore, you can't blame them at all. Yes. That's what a good lawyer can do to argue to make your damages bigger.
Now, a lot of times, a lot of immigrants, they believe in authority. When the police saying that you are at fault, and so basically they give up their rights. How much weight does the police report or the conclusion from the police, report affect the case?
Zero. A police officer's opinion is no better or no worse than anyone else's opinion. And if you think about it, a police officer is not that much more qualified, certainly not an expert in reconstructing what happened. And that officer is not there when the accident happens. They come over later. So what they say happened may or may not be correct. And the courts do not even allow the evidence of an officer's opinion into the courtroom. Because they're as right as they are wrong. And I have seen officers make every mistake you can imagine, from writing down the wrong direction, to the wrong car, to the wrong measurement, to the wrong fault. And because it's so unreliable, even though they're a police officer, courts don't even let that evidence into the courtroom.
Now, in the courtroom, how to minimize the client's liability and how to increase the liability of the defendant? What kind of evidence do you rely on?
Well, in every lawsuit, I get to ask the other side questions before the trial. It's called a deposition. And they get to ask our client questions. But the deposition is very important because it gives me an opportunity to put the other side on the spot for questions like fault. And if the defendant, for example, when I ask questions, cannot identify who did what, and I argue to the jury, he was at the accident and he can't even say who's at fault. So how can you blame the plaintiff? You can't, because he was there and he can't even say the plaintiff did anything wrong. And so good hard work in a case is about preparation. And many times I can win those arguments well before trial when I'm questioning the other witness. And that's something that I teach. I actually I'm an adjunct law professor at Loyola Law School. And this past semester, I taught deposition skills to the law students because it's such an important thing.
Well, a lot of people in our legal circle know that you have a secret weapon. That's your deposition database. Tell us a little bit about that one, why you have to keep so much expert depositions in the database.
So in many times in cases, we need experts. We have experts that tell us about how accidents happen, and a lot of times you have experts who are doctors, different types of doctors, from a surgeon to a neurologist to whatever. They oftentimes are hired by the insurance company in many, many, many cases. And so I began to keep copies of their past testimony to compare it to their current testimony to see if they were consistently testifying in favor of the insurance companies. In other words, they were biased. And I've done this for so many years and I've collected so much that I have 7,000 or 8,000 depositions, all scanned and searchable. So if I have a doctor on the other side, I can say whatever words I want, and up comes his testimony from 10 years ago on what he said, and I give it away to lawyers around the country.
And many lawyers will appreciate your professional courtesy and also the help in this area. Yeah, I think that a lot of my lawyer friend, attorney friend, has said, have you checked with Mike? He got a secret database.
Well, just because injured people aren't my clients doesn't mean they don't need help just as much as my clients. And I'm happy to help other lawyers represent their clients well, because they need help just like our clients do.
Yes, and I think that's one, that's the reason, you get so many friends. And sometimes you have a lot of friends from insurance industry who respect you. How do you build, in Chinese culture, you as a lawyer and an insurance lawyer, you might be fighting enemies against each other. But sometimes when we're in the mediation, and we were, the insurance lawyers, they would just say, hey, Mike, and then a few words, they were willing to settle. How do you build, why you willing to sit down with the opponents rather than going to court and fight them?
Let me ask you, in your lifetime, have you ever played a sport or had an event or had a fight or where you fought fairly, and then at the end you respected the other side because they were really good at what they did, they fought fairly, and you can leave as professionals even though you fought really hard?
Yes.
Afterward, you have a respect. And I believe that I fight fairly, I fight hard, but at the end, people respect that. And I don't fight fights that I don't need to fight. If I can help someone, I will, as long as it doesn't hurt my client. And over time, you see those same lawyers, those same insurance companies again and again. And I think the example you have where I was able to just say, hey, and they're like, hey, I had 5, 6, 7, 8 cases in the past with them where I did, but I had their respect, and we didn't need to go through that because we already knew who each other was.
Well, I think there's a Chinese philosopher by the name of Sun Tzu. They wrote a book of The Art of War, and one of the things is that the best strategy to winning a war is without actually starting a war. I think that's the strategy. Now, when we talk about I think most of the cases in the personal injury, I would say 90% of cases settle without trial the case.
Right.
And from your experience, you were able to negotiate a lot of good settlement. And sometimes, why do you see that settlement is better than going to trial? What's the advantage or disadvantage of settling?
The big advantage of a settlement is that it's certain. So if you don't settle, you go to trial and you present your case, and 12 people decide your value, and you don't have a ton of control. They don't get to say, here's your verdict, and you don't get to say, okay, I agree or I disagree. You have to accept it.
Yes.
When you settle a case, you're presented with a number, and if you say yes, then you're accepting it. But if you say no, you don't accept it. So there's a lot more control when you settle. Secondly, usually settlements happen much quicker in the process than a trial. And settlements are not appealable. So sometimes if you get a large verdict, the other side will appeal it, and it goes another 1.5 years of delay. So settlement, although sometimes are a lower number than a verdict, they're a lot faster and they're certain, and you have more control over it. And that's why most cases settle.
Yes. But for some of the cases, I mean, during your lifetime, have you regretted that, I should not have settled, I should have go forward, I would win big on this case if we go to trial? Have you bumped into this kind of situation before?
There's actually a term for that called settler's remorse, and it's a very well-known term.
Yes.
But I have learned that what ifs and are just things that you would drive yourself crazy thinking about. If it is something that you accept and really thought hard about and with good counsel accepted, there's no benefit to you to kind of think about it. It's done and I move on. And it allows me to concentrate on helping more clients rather than worrying about what is never going to happen. And all I'm going to accomplish is just worrying about it. I've been able to kind of put that aside, always making sure that when we do settle a case, it's our client's best interest to do that.
I have watched some of the trial you have done before. I mean, you are one of the best storyteller. You rather than telling a story, maybe you could share with us some of your secret of how you win a trial if we could not settle the case.
Well, storytelling in trials is a little different than like around a campfire, right?
Yeah.
In a campfire, everybody's waiting for the big reveal at the end and the aha where you're, oh! And movies are like that. But in trial, it's a little different. And people want to know where you're going. Now, so I always start a story by telling them a little bit about the end of the story so that they can put into context everything that I'm saying. So I don't leave everything to the reveal, because a lot of times jurors in a car accident case get bored. Right? They don't want to, but if they know something important about it and they're waiting to see how it's relevant, they stay interested. And so I found that to be very effective.
Yeah. Now, throughout your years, one of the cases that you could maybe share with us, that one of the cases you go to trial and you're so proud of it because this is a highlight of your career. Can you share with some of the cases like that?
So probably the case I'm best known for is actually the longest trial I ever did. And it was almost 2.5 months, and it was over the Christmas, New Year's holiday. We took a two-week break.
Yes.
And it was a police officer in Ventura County who had pulled someone over, and another driver ran off the road and hit the police officer and paralyzed him. And that driver was high on drugs and had a $15,000 policy.
Okay.
So you say, how do you win that case?
Yes.
Several people had it and turned it down. And I'm reading the police report, and a lawyer called me and said, can you see anything? Can you find something? I read the police report. And the driver told the police officer I had purchased some motorcycles, and the reason I ran off the road was the motorcycles were moving, and I looked back, and then I ran off the road. But he was still high on drugs. Mm-hmm. So we sued the motorcycle company for not properly adhering and tying down the motorcycle as a contributor to the accident. They didn't pay any money, and I was able to get a $50 million verdict against them.
50 million?
Yeah, 50.
Wow.
And part of that was a deposition where I took the deposition at the place where they loaded the motorcycle. And I asked the person who did it to do it again on video, because they said, we know it didn't move because we always do it the same way and it never moves. So I said, do it. And then I had impeachment. And in trial, I played it for their expert and I showed that it moved. And so that was kind of like the big moment. And the jury said, yeah, it moved.
Well, wow. From 15,000 to 50 million. That's unheard of. Yeah.
That verdict was one of the times that I was nominated for California Trial Lawyer of the Year. It was but my client is a wonderful man. His family's wonderful, and I got to know them very, very well. And when you know your clients well,
yes,
you can really argue on their behalf. And,
yeah.
I saw him. We went to a basketball game together last year.
Wow. Well, Mike, one of the things that, you have done a lot, bring a lot of, helping a lot of victims that otherwise would never be able to get help. And I think that's some of the things that, I think a lot of people was complaining that, there's way too many plaintiff lawyers. But I think besides the career, your professional job, you've done a lot of volunteer work. Tell us a little bit about some of the volunteer work or charity you have been involved in.
Well, recently, my fiance and I have been involved with COVID relief. We decided to kind of do our own thing, and we had a virtual dance party where we were going to donate $1 for every person who logged in, and we were going to donate it to buy food for hospital workers. 25,000 people showed up.
Wow.
So we donated the $25,000 plus also bought the food and helped deliver it to the hospitals. That led to a lot of people coming to us. Yeah. And ultimately, we became involved in donating to the downtown YMCA that was feeding 3,000 people a day who were waiting in line for meals. And through our sponsorship, we were able to feed, we're able to raise another $60,000, and we fed about 15,000 people.
Yes.
And so COVID was kind of a wake-up call again. But I've been involved in giving. I was a founder of a lawyers charity that still is in existence. Was president of that several years ago, and we formed. My fiance and I have formed a 501c3 for COVID relief that we donate money from our law firms, a percentage of our profits to that 501c3 charity to give to other charities that are helping our community. So,
and I also participate in one of the workshops that you host for the attorney and for professional. I think Stedman, Mr. Stedman, maybe you could mention a little bit on that one. I think it's Oprah Winfrey's boyfriend that they're very close friends of you and you were able to organizing a lot of events. Tell us a little bit on that.
So at an event we met Stedman Graham, who is Oprah Winfrey's boyfriend of 35 years.
Yes.
We got to know him, and he is a prolific author and speaker on life skills, on helping yourselves succeed. And together we sponsored, set up, organized, and then were the the questioners and kind of the moderators for a 3-part series where Stedman talked about his book, and we talked about success skills and life skills. It was very successful. We had 3 different sessions, and then we taped it and we replayed it, and now it's going to go national. I mean, it's something that was really well received, and Stedman's book is just an amazing thing. And Gina and I are big fans, and he's now become a good personal friend.
Yes, and I think his lectures are very motivational. One of my buddies, Kenny and I went there, as said we really need this kind of motivational seminar for the society, especially during the pandemic. A lot of stress, and a lot of people deal with stress and depression problem. And I think Stedman's message is very clear. And I think that's a very powerful message. Thanks a lot for helping.
I agree, and I spend time every week talking on a legal show on a Alder Talk, and a lot of what I talk about to young lawyers, old lawyers, young lawyers, kind of, it's not only about the law, but about how do you stay mentally healthy in the pandemic, because we all know we have kids at home that aren't at school, we have work issues, we have, especially if you're injured and you now have financial issues, you can't take care of your children. That applies to everyone, know, and as soon as you get down on yourself and you start getting depressed, it makes it even harder to get up every morning and do the things that we need to do to survive. And so a lot of discussions I have with lawyers is about how do we stay mentally healthy so that we can help the people that we represent.
Yeah, well, you have been in this business for a long time. A lot of people are concerned is that now we're approaching the deaths in the United States from COVID-19 is over 180,000 already. People seeing the life and death used to be not that often, but now with all these life and death cases happening around us, does the value of the personal injury cases doesn't carry that much? I mean, what have the COVID-19 changed the dynamic of personal injury practice?
Well, I can tell you this. I personally experienced it with the passing of my father. And what did I take from that was I was not able to be at his funeral, like many, many, many tens of hundreds of thousands of people.
Yes.
And what it taught me is how important life is and how important it is to spend time with someone, because it can be taken away and sometimes you don't even have a chance. And so I would argue that it may be more impactful after COVID when someone dies, because they understand what it means to communicate and spend time with your family, because we haven't been able to do that for so long. Yeah. We used to take it for granted.
That's true.
Now when you say, look, they've taken that away, people understand it because they've had it taken away for 6 months and they're going crazy. Imagine it takes away for the rest of your life. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it necessarily is going to be a negative in terms of value. It very well be a positive.
Yes. Well, one of the things that, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we all talk about, because the virus, President Trump had been labeling China virus, and there is a lot of hate incidents happens against Chinese American in the United States. And we talk about some of in the employment basis, and I see some of the people, some of our viewer or their family get discriminated on that one. Maybe you could explain to us that, in the employment basis, if you feel being discriminated because you're Chinese American, what kind of things we could do to protect our rights?
Well, first of all, the law sets forth things that you cannot fire someone or retaliate against someone for. And it's very clear. And race and ethnicity is written as clearly one of the things that it is illegal to treat people differently or to fire someone or to retaliate against them. solely because of their ethnicity, their race. And so for people who are discriminated against because the China virus, and now you say, you know, you're Chinese, you must be bad, you must be something, that is absolutely illegal. Absolutely, like a very clear illegal thing. So the issue is if we can prove that, in an employment case, there are significant advantages to winning. And the big advantage is that unlike in a personal injury case, in an employment case, if you win, the defendant also has to pay your attorney's fees. Mm-hmm. And so where in an employment matter, you don't have to win millions and millions of dollars. You can be justly compensated because the bad actor doesn't want to pay your attorney's fees. And that is something that is a big benefit to people who have been discriminated against and who have lost their job or made their job is so miserable that they can't go to work anymore.
Now, I see a lot of in university and research institute, many of the Chinese American who might have some connection, used to, born and raised in China, having some family still living in China. And sometimes they would bring, they would get invited to give a talk in China. It used to be pretty fashionable. Everybody is, share their knowledge, academic. But now with, the China bashing going on, I see a lot of Chinese American who employ in the university settings. They're being fired because they give a talk in China. They're being suspected of, stealing American intellectual property, things like that. Is any recourse for if they get fired because they're being suspected of stealing technology for China?
Yes, absolutely. If you can draw the parallel that there's no reason to be suspected and fired other than you're Chinese, that's illegal. And of course, sometimes they trump up charges like, you stole something or you did. But what a good lawyer does is they disprove that ever happened. And that's that you're lying about the reason, and the real reason is their race, their ethnicity, that's why you fired them. And once you prove that, you win the case. And but you need to step forward. You need to be okay and feel comfortable with the lawyer that represents you that, we're going to protect you.
Well, FBI Director Christopher Wray even saying in the press conference, right now FBI every 10 hours they set up one case against a Chinese national here, Chinese American or Chinese national here who are in school in a big company and that kind of things. Now, even though if I don't think there is any criminal charge filed, but can the employer fire them because the FBI suspecting them? They're spying or stealing technology for China. I mean, can the employer do something like that?
No, again, without evidence of the behavior that they're firing, then by definition, they're only being suspected because of their race, which is illegal. So if, like I said, if they say that you're stealing something, they got to be able to prove it, right?
Yes.
They can't say you must be stealing because you're Chinese. That's not, that's not legal.
Now, in terms for those scholars or professors, or doctors working in the hospital or in the lab or in the university, what kind of things they had to, what kind of evidence they need to gather in terms of proof that this is being discriminated because they're Chinese or Chinese Americans?
Well, anything that's written down is much, much more valuable than something you may hear. Because I have clients that said, oh, well, so-and-so said this, and I have someone who heard it, And very rarely do those people come forward and say they heard it because they're scared. So if you have an email, if you have a document, if you can't record someone in a private conversation, so if you have an email, if you see that someone has commented about you being Chinese, kind of out of context, like it doesn't mean anything other than you're Chinese, therefore you're bad, that's good evidence to show that your race, your ethnicity is the reason why you were fired. And if we prove that, you win your case. So collect, if you feel like you're being discriminated against,
yes,
document to the extent you can what has happened.
Many of the scholars, who get fired, they run out of job, they cannot get compensated. I mean, they no longer have salary because they might be fired for costs. Maybe the cost is bogus, but they cannot qualify for employment. How the hell they couldn't get the money to hire a lawyer? What kind of things they could do?
Well, you and I work on cases, employment cases, and personal injury cases on a contingency basis, just specifically for that reason. Yeah. The people who need the lawyer the most are the people that can't afford to pay a lawyer by the hour. And so what we do as lawyers to help those people is we don't get paid until they get money to pay us. And so any money that we would get paid in a fee is contingent on us recovering money for the plaintiff. And we wait and only will get paid if we win. If we don't win, then we don't get paid and you don't owe anything, which tells us that we take cases that we believe in people that we believe in, because we want to get paid. We have to win. So by definition, the cases we take are good ones.
Now, many of cases to win the lawsuit, we have to hire a lot of experts. Many people are afraid that, I don't have time, I don't have that much money to pay. Yes, for attorney fee, you guys are not charging us. You will recover from, after we have a settlement. But how about the cost for expert? Can you guys also advance that fee? I mean, in our industry, why don't we, in your practice, why do you think that, should the client worry about, advancing the expert fee?
Certainly not. For my clients, not only do I wait to get paid, I advance all of the costs and will only get my costs back if I win enough money for my client to pay the cost back. And if we don't, then I will eat that money and not get paid back. So I understand that the people that need money because of something that's happened to them, either in an accident or the loss of a job, don't have money to pay for experts or lawyers. Therefore, I will do it and pay all of that. Yes. And wait until the time that I can get money for my client so that they have money, but they also have some money to pay for their lawyer.
Yes. Now, one of the things, maybe technically, you could explain to us, I'm talking to one of the Chinese scholar who get fired just because the university was suspecting that, he might be stealing technology for China because the FBI have been checking on them. And so in this kind of situation, and he also talking to another colleague of them has similar experience.
Right.
Now, he's talking about which is better, class action or individual lawsuit. I mean, from legal point of view, it's better to do it individually or using a class. What's the difference? What's the advantage having a class action, or what's the disadvantage of a class action?
Well, the big deciding factor is the class action is only really available if everybody has the same amount of loss. In other words, everybody has the identical harm happen to them. Same amount of money loss, same amount of injury, same amount of everything. And then the class just figures out how many times it's happened. So you can see that for an individual who's hurt, you can't have a class action because their injuries are different than somebody else's. If someone's lost a job, their lost income is going to be different than somebody right next to them who may have been earning different amounts of money. So most of the time, there's not a class action. Most of the time, it is individual by individual. Class actions are much more like someone paid $1 too much for an item, and then it happened a million times. Everybody lost $1, so it's easier to do a class action now.
I see. Now, a lot of times, in America, there's a criminal system and it's a civil system. Right. Like O.J. Simpson's case, he's not guilty in the criminal case, but Ron Goldman's family was able to bring the lawsuit and then win at the civil court, and O.J. Simpson need to be responsible for the wrongful death action on that part. And the other case is that Wen-Ho Lee, a scientist who get convicted in federal court for being a spy for China, I think he was convicted. He admitting one count of mishandling the classified information, but I think later on he filed a lawsuit against the government and won the lawsuit. And how's that? If a Chinese scholar get fired or get charged or under investigation, can they still having a lawsuit and win the lawsuit against employers?
So the first answer is criminal cases and civil cases have different rules. And it's called the burden of proof. In other words, to prove that someone acted criminally is harder than it is to prove that someone acted badly in a civil case. But I think the case you're referring to is many times you plead guilty to a small charge, not because you're guilty, but because you can't afford to take the chance that you go to trial and get a lot more problems. And I think that jury in the civil case understood that most people would plead guilty to one small charge if it avoided them potentially going to jail for years and years and years. And then when they looked at the evidence, they realized that a lot of it was just to scare people. It really wasn't very valid evidence. And it worked. It scared him into pleading guilty. It happens all the time, right? Yes. If you're saying, look, you can go to jail for a month, or you could take a chance and not go to jail, but if you lose, you're going to jail for 10 years. Most people would say, I'm going to go to jail for a month. I'm not going to take that chance. And that's what happened.
Now, even if he plead guilty, can he still have a right to file a civil lawsuit, though?
Yeah, well, yes. There's no rule against that. Just again, the lawyers get involved, and certain evidence is admissible. The guilty plea may or may not be admissible, which changes how you present your case. But there's certainly no rule that says if you plead guilty, that you can't file a lawsuit. There's no rule like that at all.
Mike, one of the last comment, I want to see whether you could commit to it, because I see a lot of people in our community, in Chinese American who are in college, a researcher in the hospital. Right now, because right now they're under the cloud that they are spying for China. I want to challenge you. Are you willing to take on those cases on a pro bono or on a contingency basis to help those scientists or scholars?
I would be more than proud to do that. Absolutely happy to do that.
Sounds good. That will conclude our interview for this week's legal show. Thanks for watching, and hopefully, I think in the future, I want to invite Mike back to share about more his knowledge in the legal system. He's truly a master in law. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.